The person sitting closest to you right now might be carrying something you haven't asked about in years. Raymond Collier had been rehearsing this moment since the confirmation email arrived 6 weeks earlier. Not out loud. Raymond wasn't the type to rehearse out loud. But in the car on the way to work, in the shower, in that stretch between waking and fully awake when the mind runs ahead of the body. He had thought about what he would say when Steve Harvey asked him about his family. He had thought about the jokes he would make. He had thought, with a quiet and genuine pride, about his wife. Her name was Claudette. They had been married 24 years. She was sitting 2 seats to his right on the Pittman family couch. He caught himself thinking of it as the Pittman family couch and corrected himself. The Collier family couch, wearing the yellow dress she'd bought for Easter 3 years ago that he had always loved. She looked, he thought, beautiful. She looked the way she always looked to him, like the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life without knowing he was asking it. Raymond Collier was 56 years old, a retired postal supervisor from Greensboro, North Carolina. He had a handshake that left an impression and a laugh that arrived early and stayed late. He was the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and your kid's middle name. He coached his granddaughter's softball team. He was, by every measure available to him, a good man. And he knew it, the way a good man sometimes does, with a satisfaction so settled it had stopped examining itself. That was the thing no one in the audience saw coming. The other members of the Collier family were Raymond's son Darius, 28, Darius's girlfriend, Simone, Raymond and Claudette's daughter Patrice, 31, and Claudette herself. They came out to the kind of warm applause that greeting card families receive, solid, cheerful, a little inevitable. Steve Harvey looked them over with the particular attention of a man who has stood in front of thousands of families and learned to read the silences between them. He started with Raymond. Of course he started with Raymond. Raymond was the kind of presence you started with. Steve asked how long they'd been married. Raymond said 24 years, and said it the way a man announces a record. Steve asked what the secret was. And Raymond, who had been thinking about this in the car and in the shower and in that early morning light, smiled and said, "I tell her every single day that she married up." The audience laughed. Steve laughed. Darius and Patrice exchanged the private, tolerant look of adult children who have heard their father be charming for their entire lives. Claudette smiled. It was a particular smile, not the smile of a woman who found something funny, not the smile of a woman who was happy. It was the smile of a woman who had made a decision about something and was waiting with great patience for the right moment. Steve Harvey saw it. He saw it the way he always sees things, sideways, without making a production of seeing it, the way a good comedian catalogues the room. He finished laughing at Raymond's joke, and then, almost as an aside, almost as if it had occurred to him just then, he stepped 2 feet to the right and leaned slightly toward Claudette and said, "And what do you say to that?" It was a light question. He said it lightly. He was expecting a light answer. Claudette leaned in, and she said something, and she said it quietly enough that the microphone almost didn't catch it, and the studio fell completely silent. What she said was, "I say I'm tired." 2 words. 4 seconds. The studio fell completely silent. Raymond's smile stayed on his face for a moment, the way a picture stays on a wall after the nail has given way, held by habit, by momentum, by the fact that it had been there so long. Then it came down. Steve Harvey did not move. He looked at Claudette. She was looking back at him with the clear, steady gaze of a woman who had just put something down that she had been carrying for a very long time and was not planning to pick it up again. Steve said softly, "How long have you been tired?" Claudette said, "A while." He said, "Does Raymond know?" She looked at her husband. She said, "I don't think Raymond hears me the way he thinks he does." The studio fell completely silent. Raymond was sitting perfectly still. His son Darius, to his left, had gone somewhere private behind his eyes. Patrice was looking at her mother with an expression that was not surprise, and that was its own kind of information. What came out over the next 11 minutes, gently, without theatrics, in the plain language of a woman who had stopped performing exhaustion and was simply reporting it, was this. Claudette Collier had worked as a home health aide for 19 years. She woke at 5:15 every morning. She drove 40 minutes each way. She cared for elderly patients, sometimes 2 in a day. And then she came home and she cooked dinner, and she did the things that kept a household running, and she asked Raymond about his day, and she listened, and she laughed at his jokes, and she told him she was fine when he asked how she was, which was not every day, but often enough that he had stopped noticing she always gave the same answer. The origin of it, the exact moment when tired became something heavier, was not dramatic. There was no single event. She told Steve it started on a Wednesday. She remembered it was a Wednesday because she always had 2 patients on Wednesdays. About 4 years ago, when she came home to find Raymond watching television and the dishes from the night before still in the sink. She didn't say anything. She washed the dishes. She made dinner. She told him she was fine. And something in her, she said, and her voice was even, her hands were still in her lap, something in her just quietly closed a door. She had not said any of this to Raymond. She had said it to her sister once, 2 years ago, on the phone after he'd fallen asleep. Her sister lived in Charlotte. Her sister had said, "You need to talk to him." Claudette had said, "I know." She had not talked to him. She had said it to their daughter Patrice, in fragments, over years. Patrice was looking at her mother now with the expression of someone watching a dam finally give way after standing in the water for a long time. The one lie she had told, not to hurt anyone, she said, not to deceive, was the word fine. Said so many times it had become load-bearing. Said at breakfast, said on Sunday mornings, said when he asked you, "Good?" and barely waited for the answer because he already knew what it would be. She had said it because it was easier, and because she loved him, and because somewhere in the distance between those 2 things, she had lost the map back to herself. A camera operator at the far edge of the set had turned away from his rig. Steve Harvey was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at the floor, which is what Steve Harvey does when he is thinking about something that matters. Then he looked up. He said, "Raymond." Raymond said, "Yeah." Steve said, "I need you to hear something." He paused. "Your wife just told this room something she hasn't been able to tell you in 4 years. She didn't do it to embarrass you. She did it because this was the first time someone asked her a question and then waited for the real answer." The studio fell completely silent. Raymond's jaw moved. He was not a man who cried easily. You could see that in the way he was fighting it. The particular stillness of a man holding something in with everything he has. He said, "I didn't know." He said it quietly, not as a defense, just as a fact. The saddest kind of fact, the kind that can't be undone, only carried forward. Steve said, "I know you didn't. That's not the same as it not being true." He turned to the audience. He said something that a producer later described as the most unscripted 2 minutes in the show's recent history. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." He said it directly to the camera, the way he does when the game has stopped being a game. The person you come home to every night, do you know how they are? Not the answer they give you, how they actually are. He let that sit, because the people who love us the most are often the best at making sure we never have to worry about them. And sometimes that's not love. Sometimes that's loneliness with a smile on. Nobody in the studio made a sound. The competing family, the Aldridges from Baton Rouge, had not moved. Their team captain, a man named Floyd, who had come into this episode wanting to win $5,000, was sitting with his hands folded and his eyes red. His wife had her head on his shoulder. They had been married 38 years, but Steve wasn't done. He turned back to the Colliers. He did not reach for a joke. He said, "Raymond, what do you want to say to your wife?" Raymond turned to Claudette. He turned to her the way a man turns when he has just realized he has been facing the wrong direction for a long time. He said, "I'm sorry I stopped asking." He said, "I'm sorry I let fine be enough." He said, "I don't want fine." His voice broke on the last word, just slightly, like a plank giving 1 inch. He said, "I want you." Claudette looked at her husband. Her eyes were wet. She said, "I know you do. I just needed you to say it." The studio fell completely silent, and this time it was the silence of a room that has been allowed to witness something private and has understood the weight of that gift. A production assistant, near the back of the set, was crying. The stage manager had her clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. But Steve wasn't done. He told the show's producers that the Colliers would be connected with a marriage counselor. A real one, not a number on a card, but a direct referral and a paid session, arranged through the network's family wellness partnership. He said it plainly, without ceremony. He said, "You two have 24 years and you're not done. You just need someone to help you find the door." Then he looked at the audience and said, "And that's not weakness. That's the bravest thing two people can do." He looked at Darius and Patrice, the children who had grown up in this house, in this marriage, learning what love looked like from these two people. He said, "You two, you got something to say to your mama?" Darius stood up first. He crossed the stage and put his arms around his mother and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the gesture didn't already contain. Patrice followed. For a moment, the four of them were tangled together under those studio lights, Raymond's hand on Claudette's back, his children holding both of them, a family in the middle of something difficult and not running from it. The Colliers didn't win the game. They lost the fast money round by 43 points. The Aldridges from Baton Rouge took home the prize money, and Floyd cried in the parking lot afterward, though he maintains to this day it was allergies. 3 months later, the clip had been viewed 58 million times. It had been shared most heavily not on entertainment platforms, but on marriage forums, on caregiver support communities, on threads started by people asking quietly, "Does anyone else feel this way?" Thousands of comments from women and men who said they had watched it alone and wept, not because the story was theirs exactly, but because someone had finally said the word "tired" in public and not been told to smile through it. A year after the taping, Raymond and Claudette Collier had completed 8 months of couples counseling. Raymond told a local radio station that the single most important thing he had learned was the difference between hearing and listening. He said he was still learning it. He said he expected to be learning it for the rest of his life. He said this without embarrassment, the way a man talks when he has stopped performing certainty and started living in the truth of what he doesn't yet know. Today, Claudette has cut her work schedule to 3 days a week. She has started a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, peppers, something she said she had been meaning to do for 15 years. Raymond built the raised beds. He asked her 4 times if he was building them right. She told him twice that he was. He asked 2 more times anyway. She let him. Every great love story has a chapter that nearly ends it. Not with a fight, not with a betrayal, but with silence. With fine. With the accumulated weight of all the times one person needed something and found it easier to close a door than to knock on the one in front of them. What happened on that stage was not the end of Raymond and Claudette's story. It was the first day of a chapter they had been avoiding for 4 years, finally opened, in front of an audience of millions, under lights that made everything visible, by a woman in a yellow Easter dress who simply told the truth. Some people need a witness before they can speak. She had 25 million of them. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe. There are more stories here about the moments that change everything.